Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world and whatever time it may be. My name is Matt Wynn, your podcast host and resident secure identities nerd. Welcome back to yet another episode of the HID Connects podcast. Now, today, we're going to be talking about security systems and their impact on workplace and people experience with a focus on commercial real estate. Now, this is a buzzing topic because the corporate world is still grappling with return to office, hybrid work, and of course, what that means for their buildings and their facilities. So, to help us cover these trends and related technologies, I'm excited to be joined in the studio by two expert guests. First, we have Thru Shivakumar, CEO and co-founder of Cohesion, as well as HID's very own Troy Johnston, Director of Strategic Alliances on our mobile team. So let's start with intros. Thru, thank you so much for joining us at HID headquarters. Mind saying hello and tell us a little bit about yourself and Cohesion.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. So thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cohesion. It's a smart building software platform that started about 5 years ago. So we're a spin-off technology from a mechanical engineering firm. And what we do, the crux of it is looking at, the entirety of the building ecosystem, right? So we look at security systems, building automation systems, and HVAC, and we look at all the different kind of technologies and systems that are in the building, and we unify them into a single platform so that the end users and kind of tenants, residents, occupants of buildings can have a better experience inside of buildings. And then the owners and the operators behind the scenes can get data and they can automate actions back into the building systems themselves. So it's a fully kind of smart building ecosystem as you know it.
Very good. Smart buildings driven by very smart people. So again, thank you so much for joining. Is it really?
No, but it could be.
Okay, I want a royalty for that if you use it. That's awesome. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Super excited to have you. And Troy, you're in these four walls all the time, but please introduce yourself as well. Tell us about you and what you do here at HID.
Sure. So Director of Strategic Alliances for North America. I primarily work with technology companies like Cohesion. I spend a lot of time with their teams on sales-orientated focus, implementation, and again, primarily focusing on the mobile space.
Very good. Glad to have you, and welcome to Austin. You've relocated relatively recently, or maybe not too long ago. When did you move up?
A couple of months ago.
Still
adjusting, but loving it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you survived the summer. Sorry about that, just in general as humans. So now that you know our guests, let's dive into this episode's burning question, which is inspired by the legendary Tina Turner, and that is security in commercial real estate. What's workplace experience got to do with it? Okay. So, Thru, first question is for you. For those who may be unfamiliar with the space, how do you define commercial real estate? How do you define smart buildings? And you kind of describe the different stakeholders who might be engaging in this type of environment.
That is a very good question. So it's a very complex landscape, but it's really not at the end of the day. So we've kind of taken this whole, we've looked at everything to say, what are buildings and what's commercial real estate? Well, buildings are the structures. And so whether it's commercial real estate or corporate real estate or any other type of asset, you've got buildings behind it. So from a buildings perspective, we'll start with commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is owned by a landlord, and they have different people that kind of use the buildings itself. So those people, the tenants, are corporate real estate. So we kind of look at two different things of commercial real estate and corporate real estate as the two big buyers of technology. And you've got a whole host of other people that are in the ecosystem, like partners and building systems and vendors and various other folks that play in the system. But I think what we'll talk about today is commercial real estate and corporate real estate, and we'll focus on those two. So if we look at commercial real estate, you look at REITs, you look at kind of large landlords, you look at both could be public or private. And what we have there is people then have operators to run their buildings. So on the commercial real estate side, you're usually talking about big buildings or big portfolios that have different people that occupy their buildings. So on the commercial side, so back to corporate real estate, commercial. When we think about commercial real estate, you're thinking about tenants. So we hear the word tenant experience. Really, that's the people that occupy buildings in that instance is really around tenant experience. Now, if we switch over to corporate real estate is like, let's say it's Google or Apple, right? They've got a lot of real estate in the world. And so that real estate has employee experience. So we call it workplace experience. So you kind of have tenant experience and workplace experience, but I like to think about all of it as one, called the human experience or people experience.
I love
so
that.
Hopefully that kind of, it doesn't clarify a ton yet, but as we get deeper into it,
I'm so glad you defined that, though, because I think it's a big misconception. Like the terms are bantered around interchangeably all the time, commercial, corporate, thinking it's one of the same thing, and it's not. So,
correct.
Yeah, really glad you clarified that for the audience.
Absolutely. So within that, so who are some of the different stakeholders? So we talked about landlords, we talked about tenants, we talked about the humans who are working within the buildings and the facility. So Troy, tell us a little bit more about these individual pockets of groups within the categories, and what are some of their pain points and expectations as it relates to a building experience, a workplace experience, a human experience?
Well, I think the tenant experience manager, their primary role, if you go back to the commercial side, is, the minute you walk into that asset, how is it perceived? How do I feel as I move in and around the asset and go up and see the tenants, e.g. the corporates? Again, what does my experience look like? So their focus really, in my mind, over the years of been working with them, is how do I feel when I walk into that building? What is my experience? Do I walk out feeling great and going, wow? That's the big focus on the tenant experience managers. If we go into the workplace, they've got a different agenda, right? They're trying to manage their employees going in and out of, a single asset, sometimes multiple assets. How do we do this? What is the most efficient way to do that?
Very good. Thru, anything you want to add to that?
I think the workplace experience side, we're looking at how it really takes culture into the realm of workplace. So spaces, culture, all of that is intertwined in workplace experience. So how people use the space inside of their buildings and then how they move from office to office. So global traveling employees, right? So let's just say you were going to an office in Germany. Let's say you had a German office. You would probably in today's kind of world, you'd probably have to notify your admin, or somebody has to notify the office manager over in the German office. They have to then print a key card or kind of get you set up in a visitor management system, and it's a very manual process. But that idea of now with hybrid work and now with kind of the traveling employee, people are more mobile and they need the ability to go from office to office. So that workplace experience is all about that mobility and about having the connectedness of the offices and of the people. So you're looking at how do you engage with spaces more efficiently when you come into the office? How do you collaborate more? How do you have that experiences around the culture of how you're going to work today? Whereas on the commercial side, right, it's about how do you make the place for different tenants to be the best experience? How do you, when you have like one property manager managing a building and you've got a staff of maybe 5 to 15, how does that serve 2,000 people that are supposed to be in the building? So it's a different use case, as Troy kind of said, where you have to think about the two different use cases. The underlying technology is actually the same. So it's really about how do you then morph all of that technology into different workplace or tenant experience type of applications.
Very interesting. And I want to take a step back a minute because I reflect on just personal experience, and the key word here is experience, in that 10 years ago, no one seemed to really care about the employee experience within a building. People didn't really seem to think or talk too much about the experience for tenants within commercial real estate or within a specific skyscraper, for example. But a lot of things have changed over the past, especially 3-ish years. So Thru, I want to start with you. Let's talk about COVID and its impact in this space, and how have things changed and what adjustments are we seeing after the fact?
All right, let's start. Let's just start with what's wrong with the industry first. We're going to go there. So I think the industry of real estate has always been a very reactive industry in general. They've never been really proactive about the changes that are coming. And if we think about what COVID did, it accelerated a digital revolution. People were always going to go hybrid. So it wasn't COVID that created it. It was actually just timing, right? The timing of COVID it accelerated everyone working from home. And then it proved that model could actually work because we were in it for 3 years. And so you can't go back. So anybody who thinks that we're going to go back to the old normal is, in my opinion, just very out of touch with reality. And I think that buildings are back, right? But they're not back to what they were before because the use of space is changing, right? What's the purpose of space? And that's something that people are really grappling with. And I think that COVID, as it accelerated everything from for that digital transformation, it didn't really change how buildings operate. So I think we've got a pretty big miss right now in terms of the operation, the systems, the experience, and I think we have a lot of work to do there. In terms of in 2008, right, when the last Great Recession, that was another real estate recession, right? That was, we didn't really foresee that happening. We don't foresee climate change and the regulatory aspects that are going to come. It's the next one. People aren't really proactively doing things. Some people are, can't say everyone. But I think that it's a very reactive industry, and I think that I do think that we have to really be thinking about how we actually be proactive so that it doesn't become another crisis or a disaster. Like, one of the things that I was reading this article this morning, but 70% of Gen Z and millennials are all mobile, digital first. That's our end consumer, right? Mm. That's who we actually have to respond to, but that's not who we're building kind of these experiences for. We're saying, come back to offices, do what you used to do, and we're doing a disservice to the end consumer itself. I don't know if you have... I
agree. I mean, I think during COVID and still today, a lot of people throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? There's a lot of pressure on them to implement technology and transform a workplace, but there's not a lot of historical data we can use, right? So it's let's try this, let's try that and see what works. And to your point, maybe a lot of them are short term. The people signing the leases aren't Gen Zs, right? Yet. But that will come. So it's having that step back, take a longer term view and look at what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years, not necessarily what's happening today. So yeah, it is a constant state of churn, I think, at the moment.
I had an interesting customer. We were pitching a prospect, and the head of real estate, and this is the corporate side of it, she was probably younger, and she had talked about how she could not stand the fact that somebody greeted her at 7 a.m. at the base of the building. Now flip that script, right? And we talk about the commercial landlord and the operators. They're starting to staff up buildings so that people say, hello, Mr. Johnston, welcome to the building. Yep. Millennials and Gen Z people do not want to have that interaction with building staff. And there is a massive disconnect again. And there's this whole element of we need to bring hospitality into buildings. But hospitality brought in technology way sooner, right? So hospitality had things like the shade controls and lighting controls way sooner than anybody else did. And so I think we're bringing the wrong elements of hospitality into buildings and offices. So I think that there's a lot of things that we got to do better.
Yep.
I'll just
Agreed.
Put it like that.
I think COVID probably just made people antisocial too. So that may be yes. a different aspect of it as well. So Troy, I want to take this one to you. So kind of bridging some of these ideas together. We've got tenant workplace experience, but we also have buildings that are not as full as they used to be. So how do we allow for these experiences or technologies that enable these experiences? How do they marry into monetization? So let's talk about that from a business model perspective.
I think there's two ways you can look at it. From our perspective, you're looking at mobile access, right? How do we move people in and out of these assets, in isolation or mass? And how do we get more data out of a building? So there's different solutions around occupancy, giving, I think, landlords, fund managers, the metrics they need, the information they need to make an informed decision. To your point, if the buildings are not full at the moment, or the occupancy is sparse, or it's quite random, how do we get useful facts and information to pass on to people to make those decisions? That's kind of where we're at the moment in the market.
Thru, what are your thoughts?
I think buildings, yes, aren't as occupied as before, but on certain days they are. So I think we've got to think about how we look at occupancy, right? Which it may not be used 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, right? But one day can have 90% occupancy because people are coming to the buildings. So I think how we evaluate how space is used is still to be determined. And I think there's a lot of monetization opportunities there, which is the use of space and the purpose of space. And then how do you get people in and out of space? I mean, we have security as part of our platform, but it's one part of our platform and a pretty major part of our platform. But the ability to manage those users, the visitors, the vendors, the people that work there, everything is an opportunity to make that an easier process so that we can move people in and out of space and have that seamless access.
I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. So you mentioned the opportunities. What are some of those data points that you think would lead to some of those decisions that drive the opportunities to help with this problem that you're seeing. What are some of the gaps that may be out there that some of our listeners in the space may not know about? And what do you see as how they can leverage that for the good?
I think there's two things. We look at how space is used and how many people come in. So you've kind of got two factors of data that you can look at. And obviously how space is used, if you look at an office building, you've got collaboration rooms, you've got meeting rooms, you've got offices, desks. You got to figure out what you want to look into and lean into, right? I think it's looking and understanding, baselining what is actually being used, and then figuring out with the design folks and the architects, how do you actually make that to be a more collaborative space? So then you have to go through a workplace design kind of exercise to say, how can space be leveraged to kind of accommodate the needs of what this new working world looks like? It's not the what's coming, it's actually here. And bringing people back, why are people struggling with bringing folks back to the buildings? It's because it's not a great experience, right? People don't want to sit in a sterile desk environment where nobody talks to one another, right? It's a problem. But if you can encourage collaboration, you give them for some free food, you give them free booze, people will actually, come back because there's something to come back for. But to just come and sit on your computer is not really the experience that they want. So then if you kind of think about I think baselining is a big thing, because you have a lot of companies and it's mostly on the company side, corporate side, right? They have a lot of real estate that they don't know what to do with. And so you've got folks coming in from a design perspective or consulting standpoint where they say, let's survey 5% of the real estate, and then we can extrapolate that and see how people are using spaces and just assume it. But different countries, different locations, different markets, all of them use space differently. It's a culture of a city, it's a culture of a place. Those all are different. And so you really have to look at real-time data of how the space is being used, the building first, and then you can start to say, okay, let's look at the conference rooms. Which ones are being used, which ones aren't? So then you get into space utilization versus occupancy. And those are two things that people kind of confuse, I think, in the market.
Agreed.
And you just have to figure out, what does that strategy look like? I think that what people don't realize is there's a lot of data inside of the systems, like access control, and those access control systems we've heard about badge swipes, but the data and how it's collected isn't always clean, and so you need that cleaning kind of software and ability to look at how many people are in that space and who, right? And a lot of people are worried about that, but I don't think it's more about understanding the department and the business unit and who's coming into spaces and who needs spaces. So.
Very good. Troy?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Thru's saying. I think it's the lack of data or being able to interpret it, correctly. I was looking at a report the other day and it was listing office buildings and they were saying they're 70 or 80% leased. But in the back of my mind, I'm looking at what is the occupancy as an example, right? Because we've got a contract doesn't mean anyone's actually using the building. Someone's paying for the space, but who's actually going in and out of it? And to further just dive down is how they're utilising that space. Is it a collaborative environment? I know one of the consulting firms I used to work with did studies on people and their space in the office, the importance of having that pot plant, right, or having that sense of community and well-being. And I think this is what people are starting to drill down into finally. But simply saying that, we're 80%, leased or 80% occupied, it's really not giving a true sense of what the building's being utilised for.
Gotcha. And to your point earlier, Troy, how does access control play into this larger ecosystem? We're talking about experience, and people often associate access control with, I put my card against a box, it goes beep, and the door opens. So how do we take that and move it into this more experience-based environment? So long question short, what's the role of access control in this realm?
I still think it's a foundational layer from a technology point, right? It's in all buildings or most buildings, right? It's usually integrated into different touch points in a building, and it's like, how do we use that? For us, obviously, the logical choice is mobile access, the efficiencies around, again, getting people into and out of that building, getting them into their touch points, but then using applications as well to get additional data metrics out of that, right? It really depends. I think, people need to look at the building, how it's being utilised, get that baseline data, and then start to make some decisions based around that. What are our goals? Are we trying to streamline a collaborative environment? Do we want to mass onboard and offboard people? We really need to have those deeper conversations.
I also think that we need to think about, behind all of this is like the actual security element, right? Are the right people in the right spaces? And if not, and if there's something that's wrong with it, we know how to audit that back, right? And those all are just fundamental, right, behind everything. So we've got the experience side, and then we've got the technology, and we've got the security elements of it.
Very well said. Okay, let's go higher level again. And we talked about the impact of COVID and the industry as a whole, and then being reactive now, having to be more proactive. What's next? Thru, what trends are you seeing in the space? What's happening now, and what does the future look like to you?
That's $1 million question. I think it's just going to be the flexibility of the use of space. First off, it's going to be a very data-driven environment, and I think people still are understanding how to use data to then make decisions. I think you're going to see a lot of earnings reports coming out of Q4, Q1 on public companies saying that real estate is a non-core part of their business operations, and they're going to start cutting costs. Like, I think it's going to happen, and I think that that's going to really put an effect on the industry. That said, I do think that people want to come back to spaces. I think that they want to use spaces, and I think that the trends are they want it to be digital. So again, 70% of people want digital first applications. I think 70% of young under 40, I think it's like 40, 41 is millennial right now, but I think about 70% of that generation, which makes up 67% of the demographics of office using employees, they want to use 100% mobile applications, right? That's just their way of working. We need to really listen to that. So again, people don't want to send emails. They they want to put in, if they spill a coffee, they want to put in a work ticket into an application, a mobile app. They don't want to talk to people. So we have to understand, when and where are people wanting to speak to humans? When and where are they going to, be better served having a mobile application? I think the ease of access, even on mobile access, being the foundation, because if you look at how people use apps, there's got to be a hook. So there's so many apps on the market, and that hook is you have to use it to access space because that security layer is there. And I think there's a lot of technology, Bluetooth, and now we're getting into NFC, we're getting into digital wallet. I definitely think that adoption is going to be huge on everything. I think that digital first is going to be the only way forward on physical spaces, but it's a very hard thing for people to grasp.
It seems sci-fi, but it's already here. So It's like, to your point, stop reacting, be more proactive. So I'm going to come back to that question for you in a second. But Troy, same question to you. Trends. What's next?
Wait, really quick. Sorry, I have to interrupt. You said sci-fi. My new CMO used the word, it's like we're the Jetsons. Like, that's where we're going. So it is something that, we're here.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I'm still waiting for my flying car from the Jetsons, but that hasn't happened.
It'll happen.
But point taken. Totally.
You just get on a drone when they get big enough.
I'll lose some weight too. Troy, same question to you. What's next?
Look, from my perspective, I see two patterns emerging in the digital, I'm going to call it access space, right? So I see companies still, as in end users, coming forth and saying, we want to go mobile, right? We know all the benefits around that, the efficiency, sustainability, you know what I mean? Cards are, bang, we're going mobile. And that's all they want, right? So there's one school of end users that we want digital access. We know what all the benefits are, and that's it. And then there's the other path, where we want to invest in this, but what else can we do with it, right? So to me, there's two distinct paths. Before it was all in one. It was like, we're going to build an application, we're going to have the ability to layer technology into that application, that's going to be the foundation, and obviously mobile access will be part of that. But now I see two distinct paths. One that just want digital access, and others that want that foundation, and long-term we can layer it. I don't see either as a bad thing, to be honest. I mean, the goal is to go digital, but there's two different thought tracks there.
I think the underlying piece of all of this is having integrations. All of the technology needs to talk to one another. So integrations are going to be the key in terms of trends. Like, it's not going away. People are going to have to play nice in the sandbox. And I'd say 85% of the industry's there.
Correct. Yep. Agreed.
Roughly.
Yep. And it's a really valid point. Without integrations, none of this works efficiently.
Yeah.
That's the point. If there's any admin burden attributed to any of this tech, forget it, it's over. If people have to hit 2 or 3 more buttons than what they do, then it's over. So the integrations enable all of that, right?
Exactly.
That's a really good segue. So kind of my final question in terms of the meat of this conversation is knowing that the industry may be more reactive than they could or should be, and knowing that the Jetsons are here and we just need to take advantage of it, and knowing that digital is here to stay and will only grow. Thru, I'll start with you. What advice do you have for those who are looking to just start on this journey?
I think put an outcomes first approach. What are the end outcomes that you want to achieve, right? Is it truly experience? Do you want adoption? Do you want usage? What are those end metrics? And everybody has, like Troy was saying, there's 2 different paths, right, that people take. And within there's probably like 100 different paths. So chart out the outcome side of what you want. Then go in and take a real strategic approach. Do not buy the marketing hype of certain applications, right? Dig deep into the technology side, do technological due diligence on integrations. Because as we kind of said, no building is the same, no building system is the same. And so that integration capability has to be there across anything that you're going to do in buildings and spaces, because you could have one system in one building and another system in another office, and all of that just has to talk to one another. So really dig deep on the technology stack and how it can support the different systems. And then do have a project manager on the side of the customer where they understand that they have to actually project manage this. This is a big change management. This is a big change management exercise, and people have to be okay on turnaround change management type of things. And without that piece that they think they can plug in a technology, it's like an operating system. You don't just plug an operating system and say, hey, everybody go figure it out. You actually train people into it. You train the super users, you train the end users, you train the trainers, you train everybody. You do a lot of like webinars and stuff like that. And I think that anybody who doesn't have that comprehensive strategy, I think will fail on some of that stuff. But
agreed. Yeah, I've seen very similar things in our space. So 2 things: outcome driven is really critical. Why are you doing this? Are you sure? Have you done diligence on that? So once that's in agreement, from a CRE perspective, can I implement this portfolio wide? Is it flexible? So if I sell an asset, right, or acquire a bunch of others, can I implement it across as easily? Hence back to integrations and flexibility. And also that human element, I think, is really underdone. We always focus on the technology. I know I do a lot, and customers do to a degree as well, but it's that human element, right? Who is the technology actually touching, and what are the implications and the impacts? So for me, doing multiple implementations over the years, focusing on that human element is really critical. You take commercial real estate, taking a tenant manager, you know what I mean? Making them a product champion or a solution champion, echoing that down through a tenant stack. That to me is one of the most successful things, and implementing things in waves. A lot of people got a shiny new toy, they want to turn it on and go bang, 0 to 100. I would focus on the opposite. I would just incrementally implement it.
Yeah, I just would do 0 to 1 though. I do like 0 to 10, 10 to 20 versus like 1, 2, 3. Yep. We've seen a lot of people go into implementing technology really scared to change a building or do anything like that. So I would just say, when you're trying to do something from a pilot perspective, think about multiple use cases in multiple buildings, not the entire thing in one shot. I agree with that, but I do think that you have to give it a bigger shot.
Sure. About the users, and all the users are human, and that goes back to the human experience. So makes a ton of sense. Final question, and it's a very broad one. Thru, I'll start with you. What did we not talk about that we should have? Any other nuggets of insight you'd like to share with us?
We never talked about AI. So I think that there is so with all the data exists in the industry, right? I think that the normalization, the structuring of the data, and the use of it, and how do you make decisions from it, is still kind of in the infancy. And then I think taking that and going predictive, right? So then how do you use that predictive capability to then bring that back into kind of business decision making? So how can you then predict energy usage and sustainability initiatives? How do you look at labor? Like, how do you staff buildings accordingly based on how many people are coming into it? I think it's going to be a huge trend going into how buildings are used. So
absolutely.
That was one trend.
Troy, same question to you. Anything that we should have talked about that we didn't?
I think we've covered it all, to be honest. I mean, I think the generational thing's a really big thing that's often overlooked. Like I said, we deal with decision makers, in the C-suite these days that are of a certain demographic or age, if you like, and we're not looking down the track far enough. And I think we hit that. So it's up to people to go do their research and have that long-term strategic view as opposed to the day-to-day tactical things we deal with.
Very good, very good. And final question for you. And Thru, this is only for you, and thank you again for joining us. Anything going on at Cohesion that you'd like to plug or talk about?
Well, I mentioned AI, so stay tuned.
Love it. Season 3. We'll invite you back. Awesome. Well, thank you both so very much. Lots of excellent stuff, lots of great information, and no better way to end today's podcast. So thank y'all so much. Well, big thanks to our experts, Thru and Troy, for sharing your expertise and perspective on this topic. It's been a true pleasure having you both here in person today. And as always, an even bigger thanks to you for joining us for this episode. We really, truly enjoy creating this podcast and hope you equally enjoy listening. Now, while you're with us, be sure to subscribe to HID Connects. Doing so will ensure that you stay connected and not miss future episodes. Of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, while you're subscribing, be sure to rate and review our podcast. I get a bonus depending on how many stars we have. That's not true, but make sure you do that and subscribe to us on YouTube and check us out on social. And in the spirit of connection, send us your questions and topic ideas for future episodes. All you have to do is drop me a line at media@hidglobal.com. So until our next episode, thanks again for listening. May your identities forever be secure.